Penn Central Railroad was one of the biggest railroad mergers of the century at the time. In 1967, railroads were beginning to become more and more of what was basically a depth of debt, and were becoming what was now known as the railroad conglomerate boom. As we deep dive into this history of how this all occurred and how it was turned around, we'll explore some of the incidents and stories along the way to help create basically an imagination of how this all really went. Thanks for watching, and let's get right into it. The start of 1967 marked the point in history where railroads in the U.S. turned down a dark path, causing bankruptcies and company failure. Finally, the government intervened and would eventually save the day, bringing back the railroad industry with one railroad, Conrail. Now, how was this a beneficial railroad and convenient during this point in history? How did it start, and what effects did it cause? We will answer these questions in the following. Two of the largest remaining railroads at the time, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, merged in 1968 to form the whole Penn Central. At the instance of the ICC, or the Interstate Commerce Commission, the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad was also added to the merger, creating basically a mega merger. In 1970, Penn Central actually declared bankruptcy, which was at the time the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history until then. Hundreds of railroads started to get less money, causing incapability of maintaining tracks, trains, and paying for lines. All of these causes, caused lots of bankruptcies among the railroads because the ratio of supply and demand was not ideal. All 50 and more Class 1 railroads, top tier and lower, suffered this case, essentially causing a Great Depression in the railroading economy and industry. This would cause a lot of problems for passenger trains and especially freight transportation and management. Penn Central was filing for bankruptcy because, at the time, was the most incompetent railroad to exist due to poor management and disruptive services. A great example of this occurring is the Great Bankruptcy of the BAR, potato company who shipped potatoes by rail, known as the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. This bankruptcy was caused due to the Penn Central basically ignoring the potatoes sent by them, causing them to rot in the boxcars. How could Penn Central let this happen? This was due to basically the ignorance of the rail cars and incompetence of the management. That was when the government decided to step in, as merging railroads were becoming way more common through the 60s and through the 80s. The government decided to take matters into their own hands, seeing that these railroads were not doing so well. These railroads were vital to the industry, and they're more important than most people would think, because without the shipment of freight via trains, the industry couldn't hold up the demand for constant freight procedures at all. The need for logistic cargo is never ending, and a hefty amount is always required to be shipped at all times. The government had seen that the rail industry as a whole was indeed struggling, even to the point of many rail lines becoming abandoned and locomotives being done away with. Between 1960 through 1980, approximately 1/4 of the nation's route miles were abandoned, as branches were pruned and mergers resulted in redundant trackage. Then, the case of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which in 1968 merged with its arch competitor, New York Central, resulted in the creation of Penn Central, which was gargantuan and confusing for absolute millions. Penn Central. This great behemoth was originally intended to become the savior of the railroading industry. The status quo, as was the time of the best of the very best. Though this great creation of the future of the logistics was created, this certainly didn't end up the things they were supposed to be. By 1970, Penn Central had filed for bankruptcy and becoming the centerpiece for propaganda as it was the world's largest bankruptcy, costing millions out of the investors' pockets. After this great unveiling, the government sponsored Conrail in 1976 and was created as a way out of the black hole. The Conrail rail system was finally created as an attempt to save the railroad without any direct assistance. The company's mandate was to revitalize rail service in the Northeast and Midwest and to operate as a for-profit company to salvage the corrupt and disarrayed deal with the rail industry. It was established by Congress to reorganize and consolidate 5 of 7 total bankrupt Northeastern railroads. Conrail itself struggled for years before finally landing on its feet. Conrail began operations in April 1st of 1976. The company's overall achievement was to revitalize rail service in the Northeast and areas of America. Conrail's economic recovery and turnaround began in 1980 when the Staggers Rail Act was initiated. The Staggers Act had railroads deregulated largely, the rates for which they had been since the turn of the century, when railroads represented virtually the only mode of transcontinental transportation. The Staggers Act made railroads more competitive with trucks by allowing them to price services, react to market conditions, adjust rail rates, and provide special contracts. Conrail's first years of profitability came by 1981, just getting by the recovery from the Penn Central. By 1983, Conrail was the 4th largest freight hauler in the United States. In 1985, Conrail management proposed a plan for the public offering of Conrail stock. By the fall of 1986, the Conrail Privatization Act was signed, authorizing public stock offering to return Conrail to the private sector. In 1987, Conrail was returned to the private sector in what was then the largest initial public offering in U.S. history, raising about $2 billion. In the spring of 1997, Norfolk Southern Corporation, or NS, and CSX Corporation, CSX, agreed to acquire Conrail through a joint stock purchase. CSX and NS split most of Conrail's assets between them. Surface Transportation Board, or STB, officially approved the acquisition and restructuring of Conrail on July 23, 1998. NS and CSX took administrative control of Conrail on August 22nd of 1998. The approved merger plan turned Conrail into a switching and terminal railroad, operating about 1,200 miles of track out of these 3 regional areas. On June 1st, 1999, Conrail began operating as a switching and terminal railroad for its owners, NS and CSX. In 3 geographical areas in northern New Jersey, southern New Jersey, and Philadelphia, and Detroit, Michigan. In 2007, it expanded its operations from northern New Jersey to Staten Island, New York. Though the Big Blue Railroad may not be what it used to be in 2024, it still serves an important mark in history, especially since it was pretty much the savior of the railroading industry for the entire 70s through the 2000s. That area in history will be remembered and will hopefully never happen again. That just shows how powerful, important, and dangerous the railroad industry can be. It is a vital part of logistics and transportation and will always be a key to America. Thanks for watching.